Hello friends, I'm Su. Today I'm going to talk about how American financial oligarchs are repeating the history of decadence of China in Tang Dynasty. This idea was not originally proposed by me, but by Mr. Lu Qiyuan, a Chinese finance expert and Marxist economist. He published many books in Chinese and is well known in China nowadays. Mr. Lu is known for his deep understanding of capital, especially the financial capitals, and his in-depth research in Karl Marx's Das Kapital, Volume 3. And because the Volume 3 of Das Kapital was never finished, Mr. Lu takes it as his own task to work on that direction, to, in his own words, to research on the exact relation between the national capital and the social capital. Tang Dynasty was the most prosperous Chinese dynasty in the Chinese history. It started in 618 AD and ended in 907 AD. It lasted for almost 300 years, and for the first 150 years, everything was very fine and very fantastic. That can be learned as the model examples of history, actually. But at a certain point, in the year 755 AD, there was a terrible event happened in Chinese history called Anshi. It means the rebellion movement from General An and General Shi. Both of them were local military leaders at the time, but they grew so powerful and militarily strong and rich at the time that they become so greedy and power thirsty, and they want to challenge the king. So they made a war against the king. Although they were eventually cracked down, it so strongly affected the prosperity of Tang Dynasty as a whole. But why this terrible event of Anshi rebellion happened? According to Mr. Lu, it's because before that terrible event, there was a Chinese minister, Li Linfu. Li Linfu served as a Chinese minister from 734 to 753 for consecutively 19 years. This guy created financial oligarchs in China, make them very powerful, and at the same time weakens both the central government and the social economy. And let me give you a bit idea of Tang Dynasty first. When the dynasty was founded, it gave lands for free to its people, to all the Chinese citizens. For everyone, when you reach the age of 18, you can receive free lands from the central government. 100 mu in total, and 20 mu is the permanent land, which means you own it. You have the full ownership, and you can pass it to your sons and grandsons, whatever. It's up to you. And 80 mu of them are the temporary lands. You can use it, but after you die, you must give it back to the country. And mu is a Chinese unit. 1 mu equals to 666 square meter. So 100 mu is quite large land actually. In principle, all the lands you received from the governments cannot be traded. But the 20 mu, the private land, because it's private, you can trade it in certain conditions. If you have emergency that you really need money or stuff, you need to sell your land, and you can sell it because it's your own property. So, well, if you really want to sell it, nobody can prevent you from doing that. But the 80 temporary land, well, it's not allowed. You can't sell them actually. What goes hand in hand with the land system of Tang Dynasty was a tax system. The tax system at the time was called 租庸调, and 租 was a tax of the land, and 调 was the tax of some other stuff, complicated stuff, and 庸 was the tax of obligation. As a Chinese citizen, you have the obligation to the government. If the government want to build some constructions somewhere, then you should go there to do the construction works for certain amount of days, for like 10 days, 15 days, whatever. And if you don't want to go, you can pay up the obligation. Now it comes to the most important part. All of these three types of taxes were not paid by means of money in the sense of gold or silver, or copper. 租 was paid by means of grain. Every year when farmer has to pay 2 baskets of grain as 租, and 庸 and 调 were paid by means of silk or hemp or cotton, certain amount of silk, cotton. It was not big amount, it was a small amount actually. The point is, all of these goods, silk, cotton, or grain, can be obtained from your land. As long as you are a farmer, you have lands and you grow grains, cottons, etc., or you grow the trees to grow, to make silk. It's easy for you to make this stuff, and it's your own production. Everybody produces them. But when Li Linfu served as the Minister of China at the time, what he did was he changed the means of payment of taxes from these products to money in the form of gold or silver or copper. At the same time, Minister Li convinced the king to build more and more banks in the country, and to build more financial system, to make the financial system as fluent as possible, because financial system is good for the economy, is good for the wealth growth, etc. But what he didn't tell the king is he secretly used his network to monopoly all the banks in China at the time. Then it caused problems, because all of the banks were owned by him or people from his networks. So he can manipulate the financial market easily. He can manipulate money easily. When Li Linfu raised the interest rate of the banks in China at the time, you see all the currency, all the gold and silver, copper flows into banks. Then it caused the deflation of the market. There's not enough currency flowing in the market. But the farmers had to pay their tax by means of currency, by means of gold and silver anyway. So what they can do was selling their grams silk, cotton for a low price, and at times for a very low price actually. Then the farmers became poorer and poorer, that they had to sell their lands, even their children eventually. And when I say they had to sell their lands, I mean not only the land with their ownership, but also the temporary land which they get from their country. But I said previously that it was illegal to sell these temporary lands that the country gave to them. But they sell them anyway. When they get bankrupted, they don't care anymore. They sell it illegally anyway. And when this happened, their socioeconomic conditions and the politics of China already become so messed up. It's terrible. It is very much like how the United States in our time use financial tools and dollars to manipulate the price of the grams in the international market and to harvest the wealth of poor people from developing countries. When the Federal Reserve of the US keep increasing their interest rate to absorb all the US assets into the banks, actually it's exactly the same thing Li Linfu did in Tang Dynasty. Actually, Mr. Lu also compared the super rich landlords in Tang Dynasty who kept purchasing poor farmers' lands and grew bigger and bigger with the rentier class in the US in our time. So when a large proportion of GDP is based on the rent income in the US, it is very much like in Tang Dynasty how the economic structure works after Li Linfu's reform. The super landlords are in collusion with the super bankers, and in many cases they are the same. They are one with two identity actually, and it was the case in both the Tang Dynasty after Li Linfu's reform and in America in our time. The monetization of land taxes in Tang Dynasty was a very bad thing. It financializes the farmers' income actually, and turn farmers into serfs. When the farmers lost their land and they become serfs, they become slaves. And in our time, it's called dollarization. The US dollarized everything in the developing countries and use financial tools to harvest their wealth, to drain the wealth of the poor people and make them poorer and poorer. Actually, the fact that the means of payment of taxes in Tang Dynasty was turned from actual goods into money reminds me of both Professor Wen and Michael Hudson's plan of how GDP was turned into GDC in our time. In Soviet Russia, in Soviet Union, for example, they measure their GDP in terms of actual products, like how much tons of steel you produce every year, how many shoes you make, how many books you make, how many machines, whatever stuff you make. They have a list of it. It's called GDP, gross domestic production. But in our time, because of this neoliberalism, because of the privatization of the financial section since Ronald Reagan in America, everything was turned into everything was measured in terms of money. So GDP was turned into GDC. It's not domestic production anymore. It's domestic cost, actually. So what Li Linfu did was he turned Tang Dynasty from an agricultural civilization to an oligarchy feudalism in a very short time. But China had a county region system with a centralized government. So how exactly this local wealthy financial landlords steal the power from the central government? Economical enrichment is not enough. It's necessary but not sufficient condition to steal power from the central government. It's a military reform. Tang Dynasty was originally using the military system called Fubing system, which means the farmers and soldiers are the same. So the farmers own their lands. Every farmer owns 100 mu lands, and so when they do farmers' work, they are farmers. And when the invaders come, when there is a war or something, then they are soldiers defending their own lands. The person who's in charge of the local farmer armies were called 节度使, which were sent by the central government. But because the farmers and soldiers were the same in the Fubing system, the person who's in charge of the local military stuff actually get too much power. And this power was later proved to be dangerous, because when these 节度使 get so much military power and can also be in charge of some economic affairs, they started to be so egoistic and arrogant and didn't listen to the central government anymore, actually. And what Li Linfu did was actually something to accelerate this process. He made a military reform that turned the farmer-soldier system into recruited commission army. When the Fubing system was there, the farmer-soldiers were not getting paid for any of the military activities they were doing, because they were just defending their own land. So they train by themselves, they get their own weapons, and if the invaders come, they just fight to defend their own land. They don't get paid anything from the government. But when the system was turned into a recruited army system, which was called Mubing, people who joined the army actually get paid from the local government, actually from the local military leader. This actually made the soldiers loyal to the local military leaders instead of to the central government, because they get paid by the local military leaders, so they serve him, with just a commissioner. As I said before, the financial manipulation of the banks actually made the farmers lose their lands, and when farmers lose their lands, they become homeless, and some of them naturally get recruited to the commissioned army and declare loyalty to their local military leader, the oligarchs, so to speak. When the farmers owned their land, they were farmer soldiers defending their own land when invasion comes. It makes them naturally loyal to the country and loyal to the king, because it's connected to the ownership of their land. And now they become recruited army, loyal to the local military leader, this is fundamentally sabotaging China as a country, actually. But you may wonder how this Minister Li Linfu successfully convinced the Chinese king to make all these reforms, to turn China from natural economy to something like financial capitalism, privatization of banks or financial sections, and to turn the farmer-soldier system into a recruited army. How did the king get convinced for all these reforms to allow the terrible things to happen? When Minister Li Linfu trying to convince the king, he definitely did not say to the king that, well, this shit will happen, that shit will happen after this reform. He said something much more attractive. He said, for example, it will make the economy prosper. It will stimulate the economy if I make this financial, this bank reform, this tax reform stuff, and if I make the military reform, we will be able to train the professional army, and they will be very good at fighting. They will be much more efficient and much more powerful than the original soldier, the original farmer-soldier system. He was right in some sense, but he didn't show that the bad consequence could be more than the country could endure. Look at the US. You have the same thing. You have the neoliberal economists that try to completely remove the classic economic education from their top universities. And the consequence is already showing up terribly. And it's not something new. The US is just repeating a certain period of Chinese history. The Tang Dynasty went into chaos, attempted coup, inner wars, and decadence, and eventually collapsed after this shit happened. All the scholars in Chinese history agreed with that Anshi rebellion in the year 755 was the monumental moment of Tang Dynasty turning from prosperity into decadence. But only Mr. Lu showed you actually this thing happened because of the privatization of financial banks and the monetization of taxes. And this was the cause of all the shit that happened next. I can't blame the US for not learning from the history, because this is not the US history in the first place. It's from Chinese history. And history always repeats itself anyway. Not only in China, but in general. It can repeat itself in other forms, in other places. That's why for any Chinese politician, if you want to be a real good politician, you must learn completely and deeply of all the details of Chinese history. Everything about human society is there. It's an encyclopedia of human society, of human politics. And any Western political science is completely useless and brainwashing if you want to be a successful, a great politician. Well, you can read Western political science, no problem. But you only learn the terminology to play with it. There's some certain technique in our time which you can use. But you don't learn anything like authentic, like really help you from it. No, this is just a makeup you have to put on your face, to make up your face, but it's not something essential. Chairman Mao spent decades of years reading Chinese history, utterly and completely, and he only spent a very small amount of time reading Western history and political science, etc. And even within this small amount of time, he dominates these things so easily, this piece of work. It's something too shallow, something too on the surface. I want to stop now for today. It's not necessary to make it too long. Thank you very much for watching. I hope to see you next time. Bye.